Today I'd like to show you how you can share resources in Massdriver using environment default variables and remote references. In this example, we're going to create a shared infrastructure project that our operations team can use to manage networks and Kubernetes clusters and share those to API teams projects, ML teams projects, or your data teams projects. I'll go ahead and create a production environment here to house those resources and select a credential for my operations team to use to manage this AWS environment. I'll add a network or a virtual private cloud and a Kubernetes cluster. I'll speed up the configuration of these resources as the configuration isn't really relevant to the demonstration. It looks like our environment's all set up. So we have a network and a Kubernetes cluster here that our operations team can manage and also share with other teams. By sharing it with other teams, teams will be able to deploy software onto the Kubernetes cluster or utilize network addresses and subnets, but those teams won't be able to manage these resources. I'm going to go ahead and create another project for my e-commerce team to host their API. And now we'll create a production environment for their resources. Environment defaults allow you to take a resource from one project and set it as the default connection for all resources in another project. Now at the top you'll see this Kubernetes icon where you can select the default Kubernetes cluster you want to use for all applications in this production environment, and a VPC icon where you can select the default network for all of your databases, queues, and other cloud resources. I'm going to go ahead and add my example e-commerce API to the project. This is generating my infrastructure. It's going to detect that my application needs a Postgres database, and I'll also attach a web UI for my e-commerce store. Let me reframe the canvas here just to make it a little closer. And there we go. So what we have here is a very basic tiered application with a web interface, an API, and a Postgres database. This is really nice as it makes Massdriver feel more like a PaaS to your engineers, a platform as a service, where they don't have to worry about networking and Kubernetes. They can solely focus on their applications and the cloud services that they need. Now we'll go ahead and speed through this configuration again, but what you'll see here is only fields that are really relevant to my engineering team are exposed. I can focus on the number of CPUs in the database, what commands I want to execute in containers, the Docker image names, the host names of my services, and I'm not inundated with how many pods I need in a cluster or how many nodes or how to configure ingress rules. So we have an application here that is now coming up. We're able to make those big Bezos bucks here as soon as this web UI loads. Environment defaults are a great way to share resources between teams without inundating them or cluttering their canvas with those resources. So it's fantastic for things like networks and Kubernetes clusters. We also have a concept of remote references that let you have infrastructure stand in for other infrastructure on your canvas. This can be great for if you have resources outside of Massdriver that you want to be able to deploy onto or use in configuration, but you don't want to actually bring them into Massdriver. Or it can be for sharing resources between projects where you want to see the item on your canvas, but you don't necessarily want to give control of that resource to that team. So maybe you're sharing a database between two applications, or using network peering to peer together an EU project and a US West project, as we're doing here. While that network is provisioning in the background, we're going to go ahead and set up a peering project to peer together our US West network and our EU network. We'll use remote references to point to both of these networks and bring them into a hub and spoke model on our canvas. Okay, I'll create an environment for our peering. With remote references, you add bundles to your project like you would any other project in Massdriver. Here we're going to add two VPCs and a peering connection to create this peering across our EU and our production networks. Now, You can use remote references for a lot of different functionality in Massdriver. They're great for importing resources or using resources that are in the cloud that aren't being managed by Massdriver. And they can also be used in preview environments if you want to be cost optimized for some of your cloud resources. Say you have a big Postgres database running in staging and you want to share it with preview environments for all of your pull requests of your application. I'm going to go ahead and select my US production network here to stand in for this resource, and you'll see the UI kind of changes a bit. And then I'll do the same for my EU production environment as well. Grab this VPC, hit assign, and it replaces that resource. I can go ahead and click configure and deploy now, and it would create a peering connection between these two networks. This allows my operations teams to manage their networks in their countries, but have another team that maybe manages my global networks. There's a lot of power in remote references and environment defaults. If you have any questions about how to design projects in Massdriver or some of the other functionality exposed by these two features, feel free to reach out to us in the support channel on our community Slack.